It's August 30th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with South Korea's national budget bill for next year. The $495 billion budget marks the country's smallest increase in almost 2 decades, reflecting the government's dedication to improving fiscal soundness amid declining tax revenue and economic uncertainties. The United States says it is still willing to sit down for talks with North Korea, even after the leader Kim Jong-un called out Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, referring to them as gang bosses. Wagner Group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin has been buried in a private funeral in his hometown of St. Petersburg, following a suspicious plane crash 2 months after his brief mutiny against the Kremlin. South Korea is tightening its belt more than ever, with its smallest on-year increase in nearly 20 years for the coming year's budget. Now, all to prioritize and focus on fiscal discipline. Our Shin Ha-young starts us off.
The government's budget proposal for 2024 was revealed following a cabinet meeting on Tuesday. For this year's budget, the Yoon administration focused on building a solid foundation for fiscal soundness. While continuing with this theme for next year's budget as well, it has also focused on improving the country's financial structure.
우리 정부는 경제 체질을 시장 중심 민간 주도로 바꿔 민간이 더 활발하게 투자하고 지출하고 일자리를 만들어내는데 역점을 둘 것입니다. 이를 위해 민간 투자를 저해하는 킬러 규제를 과감하게 철폐하고 민간의 자금이 흘러갈 수 있도록 금융 시스템을 정비할 것입니다.
In order to do so, South Korea will continue to tighten its belt. The government proposed a budget for next year of 656.9 trillion Korean won, or around $495 billion at the current rate. It's an increase of 2.8% from this year's budget, the smallest on-year increase since top-down budgeting was first introduced in 2005. Also, the government has gone through major spending reforms in order to secure an extra $17 billion of funds for use in the budget. The centerpiece of the bill is some $14.6 billion allocated to bolster the welfare system for the socially vulnerable. This includes increasing the maximum basic living allowance for low-income families to approximately $1,400 per month. That's $160 more compared to this year and more than the total increase implemented by the previous administration. As a response to the aging society issue, the government has increased the number of jobs for seniors to 1 million, which is approximately 10% of the elderly population and marks a record high increase of 147,000. It has also increased senior employment allowances by 7%. Those allowances have been frozen since 2018. Tackling the country's low birth rate, parents with newborns will be eligible for up to 1 million won, or around $750 per month, in parental allowance beginning next year. Also, to achieve a balance between work and childcare, the period of paid childcare leave will be extended for the first time since 1995 from 12 months to 18 months. Next year's budget has also been designed to manage the increase in government debt by reducing expenditure growth.
Despite a decline in tax revenue, we mitigated the deterioration of the fiscal balance for the upcoming year by curbing the growth rate of total expenditure. We have also managed to control the increase in national debt, keeping it at its lowest level since 2019 at 61.8 trillion won, as part of efforts to establish a solid foundation for fiscal soundness.
With next year's budget, South Korea's budget deficit to GDP ratio is forecast to be at 1.9%, worsening by 1.3 percentage points from this year. The total national debt to GDP ratio is expected to be 51% next year, up 0.6 percentage points from this year. The government will submit the final bill to the National Assembly on September 1st, and the legal deadline for the National Assembly to pass the budget is December 2nd. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Despite North Korean leader Kim Jong-un referring to the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan as gang bosses, Washington says it remains open to holding dialogue with the reclusive state. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
Earlier this week, North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that its leader Kim Jong-un slammed the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, calling them gang bosses for agreeing to regularize their joint military exercises. However, despite Kim's comments, Washington says it remains open to dialogue with Pyongyang. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said Tuesday that the U.S. has said on many occasions that they're open to dialogue with the reclusive state, and it remains true even now. Despite the U.S.'s openness to hold talks with Pyongyang, South Korean ambassador to the United States, Cho Hyun-dong, said Tuesday during a forum hosted by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies that the opportunity for reopening dialogue with North Korea is not likely for the time being. Cho also reiterated South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's stance that the continued provocations from Pyongyang will only strengthen the trilateral security cooperation between the three countries. Meanwhile, during the same event, the U.S. National Security Council Coordinator for Indo-Pacific Affairs, Kurt Campbell, highlighted the three allies' commitment to institutionalizing their three-way cooperation. Campbell stressed that what was seen in the Camp David summit was a sense of three equal, powerful, committed, determined nations meeting on equal terms, noting that no country is weaker or stronger in the alliance. However, he also said the trilateral cooperation cannot be future-proof, given the historical differences between South Korea and Japan being the major source of conflict between the two neighboring countries. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says American companies are complaining that China has become uninvestable due to being too risky. The Commerce Secretary's comments came on Tuesday as her delegation left for Shanghai after holding talks with officials in Beijing in an attempt to normalize economic ties with China. She said U.S. companies have pointed to fines, raids, and other measures that have made it risky to do business there. She added that there have been no rationale given for Beijing's ban imposed earlier this year on American chipmaker Micron Technology, citing the challenges American companies are now facing in China. The 11-day South Korea-U.S. joint military Ulchi Freedom Shield drills come to an end tomorrow. And for the past couple of days, special forces have been out in the ocean to master techniques for maritime infiltration. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has this report.
Special operations forces from South Korea and the U.S. head toward the shore on rubber boats, keeping their positions low. A number of the Special Forces personnel swim the rest of the way, cautiously making sure it's safe for the rest of the team to arrive. This is a glimpse of the combined training that Seoul and Washington do on a daily basis to infiltrate the enemy's base. Since last week in Yangyang County, Gangwon-do Province, around 100 personnel from South Korea's Army and U.S. Special Operations Command Korea have been conducting field training exercises to enhance skills in maritime infiltration. The training is part of the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise, which runs until Thursday. This combined special operation is aimed at strengthening Seoul and Washington's interoperability.
Combined special operations capabilities could be further strengthened by mastering various tasks with the U.S. Special Operations Command Korea. We will continue to train and establish a perfect readiness so that we can accomplish any mission in case of emergency.
Seoul and Washington Special Forces master maritime infiltration techniques, including special strike operations and close combat techniques. The U.S. Captain Jay said the training is also focused on building the skills of leaders at every level, noting it as being the most important resource. He also underlined strong teamwork with South Korean forces.
For 70 years, American and Korean soldiers have stood shoulder to shoulder, dedicated to the defense of our homelands. Our ironclad alliance is integrated at every level, from the strategic to the tactical. I am proud to work with my Korean brothers. 같이 갑시다, 필승!
Going forward, Seoul and Washington Special Forces vow to prepare for every scenario on air, land, and sea.
U.S. Korea! We are together!
Chae-Min-dong, Arirang News.
Following Japan's Fukushima wastewater release, tensions between China and Japan are heating up, to a point where Tokyo is hinting that it'll file a complaint to the World Trade Organization against Beijing's seafood import bans. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
Beijing's decision to ban all its seafood imports from Japan has prompted Tokyo to threaten to take Beijing to the World Trade Organization in order to seek a reversal. Japan's Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi on Tuesday said that Japan will take necessary action under various routes, including the WTO framework. On the same day, Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson urged Japan to take concrete action.
In response to the Japanese side's extremely selfish and irresponsible wrong action, China and other parties at stake have the right and responsibility to take legitimate, reasonable and necessary precautionary measures to safeguard marine environment safety, food security and people's health.
In China, demand for seafood already appears to be falling, putting those in the fishing industry in a tough situation. Outraged Chinese citizens have been dialing the numbers of Japanese businesses and institutions to complain about the release. In the 4 days following the start of the discharge, more than 6,000 calls were made to the Tokyo Electric Power Company, while 220 calls were made to police stations across Japan. Japan has also reportedly made phone calls with complaints to the Chinese embassy and consulates, something the Chinese embassy says seriously disrupts the normal operation of their offices. Flights to Japan from China have decreased by a third over the past week, and more people with flights booked are demanding refunds. According to Japanese media outlets, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will likely address the issue at the ASEAN meeting and G20 summit next month. There he is expected to engage in dialogue with participating countries and reiterate that the wastewater discharge meets international safety standards. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
So we're nearly into a week since Japan started to release the Fukushima wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. How has the process for this 30-year-long project been for the past week? For more, we're joined by Stephen Barrick this morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
So Stephen, how is the process going so far? I mean, what's it looking like at the moment?
By all indications, things are going kind of according to plan. The South Korean government has their own, I think it's 4 spots in Korean waters where they're assessing the levels of elements such as tritium. And they said yesterday that they've not, according to their measurements, everything are within safe levels. That's not surprising. We should keep in mind that Fukushima is still fairly far away from the Korean peninsula, and this water release only just started about a week ago. So the Japanese government is also maintaining a website where they're providing some kind of frequently updated information with diagrams and numerical readings of the different elements. So things seem to be going as planned, but as the previous news stories have shown, a lot of this is about perception. A lot of this is about how people feel about Japan's decision to do this. So we've not been able to come up with any kind of real scientific basis for criticizing this. Right now, I think things are more at the level of rhetoric and perhaps emotion, but this is definitely something that's going to be an issue of regional concern for a while going forward.
Right, we are only a week into the process. Like you said, it's a 30-year-long process. So still in early stages to really evaluate the scientific side of it. Our Lee Kyung-eun reported earlier that tensions are rising between Japan and China over the wastewater release. Stephen, what's really happening?
Well, I'm not on the ground in China, but there just seems to be, we need to keep in mind that these are 2 countries that have a long history of antagonism, and there just seems to be quite a lot of public discontent in China about the decision by Japan to do this, both on the levels of governments and among the public. There's stories in the Chinese and international media about how people online in China are expressing displeasure with this and are making these harassing phone calls to various Japanese institutions. I can't really speak to, exactly what things are like in China now, but I would just draw attention to, perhaps people in China feel as though Japan went ahead with this without directly consulting the Chinese government, or, perhaps people in China feel as though, particularly people who rely on the ocean, who rely on kind of the seafood industry, maybe they feel as though even if Japan is doing this within safe international standards, they might feel like, due to the perception of seafood and due to the perception that this water could possibly be dangerous, that their livelihoods are being affected in a way that they had no say in. So I guess there is some frustration there. The task will then go to perhaps the leaders of the country to maybe try to talk this out, to maybe try to calm the situation down.
Right. Similar tensions, or rather, I would say concerns, are also rising here in the country. That's why the government is conducting a 100-day intensive inspection into seafood imports because of the Fukushima concerns. Now, do you think it'll actually help tame those fears?
I think it can only help. At the very least, the government is, I think, showing the Korean public that they're taking this seriously and that they're mobilizing resources to deal with this. They are not simply relying entirely on the word of Japan or the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've allocated their own resources to this, and they are taking at least some kind of preventative steps. So I think that's prudent. We're early in the game, and I would be very surprised if shipments coming out of the ocean now displayed any sign of increased radiation. You'd have to ask a scientist about, the real potential for risk here. Like, I've read testimonies by scientists on this issue who kind of giggle about the suggestion that any of this could be dangerous. They said that these seafood now would be carrying just very standard and very predictable levels of radiation. There's nothing for anybody to worry about. But just on an optical level, and just in terms of attempting to allay concerns among the Korean public, I think it makes sense for the Korean government to kind of attack this head on and to show that they are providing, not only relying on outside assessments, but attempting to have their own kind of objective assessment. I think that makes sense.
Right. And as a correspondent yourself, how seriously do you think South Korea is taking or coping with this whole Fukushima release project?
I do think that the Yoon government is taking this seriously. I think President Yoon is in a bit of a challenging scenario in that he has invested quite a lot of political capital in improving ties with Japan. And so he's got a kind of difficult balance to strike where he has to be very mindful about the fears of the Korean public. And you can see that he's doing that in that he has maintained South Korea's ban on seafood imports from this Fukushima area. He has, at the very least, acknowledged that there is a potential kind of risk there, or that the public opinion surrounding that issue is just kind of too volatile to touch. So I think for a number of reasons, he's taking it very seriously. Time will tell, and hopefully we'll get more and more data as things go ahead that we can base our decisions when it comes to this on real scientific information. And hopefully over the coming weeks and months, we'll get a clearer sense of just what, if any, kind of public health risks this poses, and we'll be able to craft policies and craft our responses based on that. But just in the meantime, it does seem to me like President Yoon and his administration are taking this issue pretty seriously.
Right. That's why the government announced yesterday that it's allocating over $560 million US dollars for Fukushima-related matters to really get through and overcome those fears and challenges.
Yes, it remains to be seen exactly where that money will go. But yeah, I do think that Yoon I think that just part of what makes this challenging in Korea is that seafood is such a huge part of the diet. I mean, almost every meal is served with some kind of fish, or fish is used as seasoning and in sauces. And that's just a really kind of core part of the Korean diet. So I do think that Yoon has ample reason to want to assure the Korean public, and I think he's done something wise by mobilizing at least some of this country's very robust scientific infrastructure. South Korea employs a lot of scientists, has a lot of research institutes, a lot of universities. So I do think the infrastructure is in place to deal with this soundly.
All right, Stephen, thanks so much for joining us this morning. You have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Russia, where Wagner mercenary group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was buried in a private funeral. Now, the ceremony in his hometown of St. Petersburg on Tuesday was carried out without military honors. This despite Prigozhin being given Russia's highest military award, the Hero of Russia, for leading Wagner forces in Ukraine. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin also did not attend, with a Kremlin spokesperson saying that Putin's presence there was not envisaged. Prigozhin was among 10 people who died in a plane crash last Wednesday. Other prominent members of the Wagner Group also died in the crash and were buried in separate funerals on the same day. Now, the plane crash came 2 months after Prigozhin led a failed mutiny against the Russian army's top brass. Washington has suggested that Putin may be behind the fatal crash, but Putin denies any involvement. Now, the U.S. state of Florida is bracing for what is being described as an unprecedented storm. Hurricane Idalia is set to make landfall on Wednesday morning local time. Evacuation orders have been issued for at least 28 of Florida's 67 counties. Over 5,000 members of the National Guard have also been put on standby. Forecasts warn of strong winds, up to 30 centimeters of rain, and storm surges of potentially more than 4 meters in some parts. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis warned that the Big Bend area, where the hurricane is expected to hit, hasn't seen a storm this size since the 1800s. Idalia is currently a Category 2 hurricane, but is expected to reach Category 3 before making landfall. Now, 1,300 schools have been destroyed and others damaged in Ukraine since Russia's invasion in February 2022. That's according to a UNICEF press release on Tuesday. It added that only a third of school-aged children in the country are going to classes in person. Meanwhile, over half of Ukrainian refugee children living across 7 host countries are not going to school due to language barriers, lack of school access, and burdened education systems. In Ukraine, many schools have suffered direct missile and artillery hits in the 18 months of war, while others have been shut down as a precautionary measure. UNICEF also noted that Ukrainian children have experienced 4 years of education disruption, as the start of the war was preceded by the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, in a world first, a live worm was pulled from the brain of an Australian woman. In an operation in June 2022, surgeons found the roundworm, which had grown to 8 centimeters long. It was removed from a 64-year-old from New South Wales who had been suffering symptoms since January 2021. The roundworm is usually found in pythons. The patient likely became infected after collecting and eating wild grass. The case was documented in September's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal.
Good morning. It's another rainy start to the day for southern parts of the country. They have been dealing with downpours. Parts of Gyeongsang-do provinces are seeing 40 millimeters of hour of rainfall, drenching down the area. And Jeju is also being drenched with heavy showers. And these thick rain clouds will dominate certain parts of the country all day today and into tomorrow. Heavy rain warnings have been issued for the east of Jeollanam-do and west of Gyeongsang-namdo provinces and mountainous regions on Jeju Island. And parts of Jeju and west of Gyeongsang-do provinces are under heavy rain advisories this morning. In fact, Gyeongsang-do provinces and nearby areas will be hit the hardest by downpours. Jeju and Jeollado provinces could see more than 120 millimeters of downpours into Thursday. We had cooler overnight temperatures in the capital. Afternoon highs will be similar to yesterday in Seoul, but southern regions will have highs that are 1 to 4 degrees lower this afternoon. Sorry for those taking a late summer vacation. You need to take the weather into account and stay away from the water if you're traveling to the south and Jeju Island. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.